Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big guy right here. This is the Terrain365 Otter Pocketknife. First off, thank you very much, Patreon patrons. They make it possible not only for the channel to exist and for it to make sense for me to be spending my Friday evening doing this review here, but more importantly, they make it possible for me to look at a knife like this that is not cheap, $275, and go, yeah, I should pick one of those up for the channel. People will find it interesting. My Patreon patrons mean the world to me. Thank you very much. Next up, screw Tony Scullambrini of everydaycommentary.com. Tony, of course, is a good friend and the co-host of Gear Geeks Live and a really great reviewer in his own right. In fact, Tony is one of the reviewers that I trust most. And in fact, I read a review of this knife from him and it was like, oh, that's got to be good. And that put this guy back on my radar. So Tony is the reason this is here. And so screw you, Tony. Thank you very much, Tony. Next thing, let's do some size comparison real quick. Let's go ahead and put it up next to the Spyderco Delica. Let's put it up next to the Ontario Rat number 2. What we see is in terms of actual blade length, this guy is almost identical to the blade length to the Rat 2 in terms of the amount of sharpened blade, as well as not far off it in terms of the profile of the blade. Then here it is against the Spyderco PM2. See here, this isn't a huge knife, but actually it feels a little bigger than you might expect. Here it is against its sort of bigger brother, if you will, the Terrain365, oh, come on, what's the name of this guy? Invictus AT, I think? Either way, it's an interesting piece, and I've got a full review of this guy coming up here soon, but these are related, same materials and whatnot. And then finally, here it is against a Great Eastern Cutlery Wall Street knife, which in many ways, spear point knife, these feel very similar in a number of ways, although the patterns are a little bit different. So there is that guy. Then next thing, what the heck is Terrain365? Well, Terrain365 is a company that really specializes in one material, and that is the steel, well, which actually isn't steel, but the blade material here is dendritic cobalt. They refer to this as a Terravantium blade, which, okay, sure, whatever. But that is kind of their shtick, right? And it's a very interesting company, Michael Vagnino and Patrick Ma, as I recall, and they're doing some really interesting stuff these days. So, anyways, that's Terrain365, and it is they're a company that is actually kind of just coming onto the market, coming onto the scene, but they're doing some interesting work. And then finally, a quick note, this is a $275 knife, so if you're looking at this thinking, oh, cheap slip joint, no, not quite so much, but we'll talk about why later on. So let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting knife. So to start with, on the good side, this is actually under 3 inches in terms of overall blade length. Let me grab my ruler, which is still over on my desk from writing the reviews. We see this guy is coming in just right in that vicinity. Maybe if the cop really didn't like you, they could call this over 3 inches. But either way, it's a 3-inch blade. That is going to make this legal in a lot more places, including potentially, and talk to your lawyer, not on a YouTuber, but potentially in the UK market, which could actually be a really interesting area for this particular knife. Next thing, this is a safe knife. This is a slip joint. So one thing to note is that you do not have any kind of lock on this knife. In order to close the knife, you just press the blade closed. But it has a couple of features that make that good. One of them is that it has a very reasonable back spring to it. It's got a fair amount of spring. If you just kind of perturb it a little bit, it will come back. It also has a half stop, meaning that it will naturally stop right there, and then you have to keep pushing to go a little bit further. And actually, it has this little unsharpened area at the heel of the blade, which means that even if this does start to come closed on your finger, which it's probably unlikely to do, it's going to stop with an unsharpened portion against your finger rather than a sharpened portion. So you're unlikely to hurt yourself too badly with this. I mean, of course, nature finds a way, and don't come crying to me, but at the same time, this is a slip joint that I felt perfectly safe using on a daily basis for daily tasks, and that's great. Next thing, there are a bunch of different variations of this guy. There are variations of this guy in a bunch of different G10 colors, as well as a full titanium version, going for $320. And, so it's nice to see a bunch of variants. This is the gray G10, which actually, in practice, ends up feeling a lot more bluish than just a gray. This is a gray Spyderco Delica. If you don't know this knife already, then what are you doing watching my channel? Anyways, it doesn't end up feeling super gray, right? And we'll put it up next to the gray of a carbon fiber. Actually, you know what color my tape. I'm going to go ahead and move on. Anyways, it's gray, right? They're calling it gray. It's bluish. It's good, right? Okay. Next thing, this is fully ambidextrous. Wow, we're getting a good start here. You got a nail nick on both sides if that's your shtick. It opens just beautifully from both sides. It pinches open quite nicely, by the way. You don't need the nail nick on there. And because it's a slip joint, there's no lock. Everybody has the same experience. Beautiful thing. Next thing, this is a very simple design, but it's done pretty well. Right at the end of the day, there's really not all that much to it. It's a nicely contoured, and it is indeed contoured, set of G10 scales here on top of this Terravantium blade with a pretty simple spear point, right? There's not a whole lot to it, but that actually, I think, works out pretty well. It's a relatively non-threatening looking knife, which isn't a thing for a lot of folks, but ends up being very important for some. And it's also very well finished. It just works really well. You can see here that the back of this is relatively smooth. Yeah, you can see a little tiny bit of gap in there, but I might have, you clean out a little bit more. You might even be able to get that closer. This part here looks very nice. The bail is good. The blade finish is good. Honestly, it's just nicely made. This is a very, very nicely made knife, and it's at the level one would expect for a $275 slip joint, right? It's pretty solid. Next thing, this is a disassemblable knife. You saw that I had a little bit of issue in my disassembly. Part of that was me being not a brilliant man, but most of it was just like, this comes apart and goes back together, etc. And I appreciate that. A lot of slip joints are not at all disassemblable. The fact is, this one you can get in there and clean things out, which is very nice. Then finally, on the good side, I like the blade shape on this guy a lot. Then not only do you get a nice little swedge on here, which I think does actually add a little something to it, but you get a very classic spear point blade. With a little bit of belly, a nice flat area here, and then a spear point at the front of it, which gives you a little bit of piercing, a little bit, but mostly it's just good. And you've got yourself a very nice little sharpening choil down at the end of it. I like this. I think this is a very nice blade. Just flat out, I think it looks attractive. I like a spear point a lot. It's nice. And so to me, at least, all that is the good, is that it's a nice blade shape. Disassembly is a thing on it. It's a simple thing done well, fully ambidextrous, with a couple of different variants, as well as a safe action, and it's under 3 inches, which is going to make this more attractive to a lot of folks. On the great side, to me, has to be the material. That's a Terravantium. This is a dendritic cobalt, and as far as I'm aware, this is actually the first sort of mainstream production available slip joint that's available. Maybe they did a UKPK, Spyderco UKPK, and LC200N, but aside from that, I think that just happened. Anyways, aside from that, there really aren't many slip joint style knives that are available in rust-proof materials. And this is a material, not a steel. This is dendritic cobalt. And, you can tell that in a couple of different ways, but one of them is these are powerful magnets. Nothing here. As opposed to, if you put that up against your, Spyderco Delica. Yeah, that's pretty magnetic right there. But anyways, so, that's one important thing to remember. But the thing about the dendritic cobalt is it's very strange in use, because it feels like it's dull very quickly. According to your general knife geek tests, just the finger test, like how does it dig in, or, on a fingernail or something like that, it passes a lot of those tests. It fails some of those tests earlier. And in fact, if you're trying to do things like feather sticking or cutting, flaying freaking paper towels, it's not going to feel that sharp. But the thing is, then you cut with it, you're like, wow, this is still sharp. That's weird. And you use it on some cardboard. It's like, wow, that is actually quite sharp. And then you keep going, and it keeps cutting it, and it just keeps cutting for a while. Even though it kind of feels like it might be dull, it really actually isn't. It holds a really nice working edge, a toothy-ish kind of edge for a while there. It's kind of an interesting contrast between, like, the knives that are like, oh, wow, the edge stays forever, and then knives that just cut for a long time. This is the latter, right? In practice, my experience with it is that it is good to go for daily cutting tasks, right? Unless you are needing that super acute little edge, this is absolutely fine. And it works, right? It's a solid, completely rust-proof steel, and that's the important thing about this. That's the big perk, right? Is that it is completely rust-proof. It is not oxidizing. It will not stain. This isn't like, oh, it's probably not going to stain in daylight. This is like, no, it doesn't. It cannot rust. It does not have iron, right? It is non-ferrous and it is non-magnetic, which actually could be interesting for some people in some particular areas. Although it's worth noting that on this guy, the hardware here is actually magnetic, as are the liners, or at least the back spring, I'm sorry. I believe the liners are not, but the back spring of it is, which would make sense. They kind of need that to get this kind of a stronger pull. But anyways, I digress. This is just a really interesting material. And this knife in S35VN would be kind of interesting, ideally at a much, much lower price, but, this knife in the Terravantium, much more interesting. So to me, that's what's great here, is it's a very unique blade material. On the bad side, to start with, one thing I just highlighted is that there is some magnetic elements to it. Unlike on the Terravantium frame lock here, Invictus 8A. This is a knife that is completely non-magnetic. There is nothing on here. This guy has a little bit of that. I don't know for how many people a little bit of magnetism ends up being a major trouble, but that is one thing to remember, right? Next thing, the bail on this guy is hard to remove. It might be removable. It might actually not be. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, it was a pain in the neck during disassembly, and it means you're going to have to rotate things out of position rather than taking things off entirely. Not the end of the world, but it is a thing. Next thing, it is a little bit on the big side, but not necessarily in the sense you'd expect, right? If we put this guy up next to like the Benchmade Proper here, or the GEC Wall Street, what we see here is it's just kind of bulky. It's a little thicker, pardon me, than you might expect, especially relative to like the Proper or something like that. And just on this dimension too. It's just a relatively bulky little boy here, right? And I get it, and that's kind of the way you have to do it if you want the blade hanging out the top, but it just ended up feeling a little bit big, and it feels a little bit big for some of your classical slip joint carry methods, right? It feels a little bit big for a pocket slip. I carried it that way. It works. It's fine, and in fact, this is, like a coin pocket knife for many people if your coin pocket's pretty deep. But anyways, if your coin pocket's pretty deep, then anything's a coin pocket knife. I digress. But it is a little bit on the bigger side. Next thing, the balance on this guy is a little bit on the odd front. What I mean by that is that, in a perfect world, at least for me, a knife should balance right around where your index finger goes on it. The balance point on this guy is a little bit closer to here. Is that the end of the world? No, not particularly, and I get it. They want to have a strong spring, and it's good to favor that, but the balance is a little further back. Next thing, I kind of wish there was a clip on this guy. It is a very interesting knife, just as a slip joint as it is, but I kept finding myself wanting to just carry it like, put a clip right on here and carry it that way, right? I think that would have been very interesting, and it would have made this a little bit different, right? A little bit more compelling for a group of people. And if you could, remove the bail here and put a clip on in its place, that'd be kind of cool, right? There's nothing saying you can't get one of those little hanging pocket clips or something like that, but, honestly, I think that would have been interesting to see a clipped option here. Then finally, on the bad side, the price on this guy is quite up there, right? It's $275 for this guy in G10. If you go up to a full titanium handle, you're at $320, and ooh, boy, that's a price, right? Especially given the fact that in the slip joint world, a lot of stuff is relatively inexpensive. This is high up there. You are paying for this blade material right here, 100%. I can't see any other way around it. It's a fine slip joint. It's well made. It's not like I feel like they're ripping my face off, but this is just a lot of money for a knife that is, at some level, a relatively simple thing. And if you compare that to what you're getting, GECs for, or even other options from other folks, $275 is a good amount of change, right? So I feel like this is a very pricey choice. And so to me, at least, that's what's bad, is that it is pricey. I wish there was a clip option here. The balance is a little far back. It's a little bulky, for lack of a better term. The bail is hard to remove, if not impossible directly, and it is a magnetic, or there are magnetic components to it. But again, I get it. On the ugly front, there's nothing really ugly here, so let's go to the final conclusion, which is that this is weird but neat, right? It's at a size that a lot of folks are really going to like, legally speaking, as well as practically, right? It's safe. It's got a lot of variants out there for people. It's fully ambi, simple, but really well done, disassemblable, and with a very nice blade made of a material that is pretty unique and unusual, right? It is magnetic in places, unlike its big brother. The bail doesn't come off. It's a little large. I'd like to have seen a clip option at the very least, and the price is up there. And honestly, that price is probably the thing that's keeping this out of, I don't know. I'd go back and forth on gem status for this guy. It's really interesting, but it's also very expensive. But this steel is unique. Look, I think it's kind of one of those conditional sorts of things, right? It is a great knife. I want to make no bones about that. And in fact, Tony gave it a 20 out of 20 with a very enthusiastic review, and I think that's fully deserved. I'm with him 100% on that. It's a nice piece of gear generally, and it's a pleasure to carry. And it's also, though, and this is the big one, this is a completely stainless slip joint. And that is a market that is currently not really a thing, right? To the best of my knowledge, and like I said, I'm not as deep into the slip joint world, so maybe somebody's done this before, and if you know of the one, let me know down in the comments, right? But I think this is the first fully stainless slip joint that's really widely available in production. That's kind of the big deal there, right? And so this is going to be a huge boon for this particular model, because there are going to be people around the world dealing with slip joint laws that ban locking knives, but still want something that is completely rust proof, and that's going to be this guy, right? That's going to be, and this is going to be a really good good option for it. Even if there are other ones, this is going to be a solid one, right? And the Terravantium being a good-to-go for EDC sort of steel, which you don't have to worry about rust at all in, that's going to be huge. And so I think this guy has a very, very clear use case, even in a world where there are increasingly more of the G10 slip joints every day, right? I mean, modern slip joint isn't uncommon anymore. I'm very glad to hear that, by the way, but, well, to see that, I suppose. But nonetheless, I think this is going to be interesting. And so I think this is a really nice knife for anybody. And this might actually stick around in my collection for a while. I don't know. Maybe it will stay around forever. Maybe it'll just be for a little while. I don't know. But it's a very, very nice knife. A nice knife for anybody and a shining freaking gem for folks who have both restrictive laws and rustastic climates, right? If that's something that you're like, oh my God, this is going to be a really good choice for you. So honestly, if any part of this knife is looking good, if you're looking at this and thinking, yeah, I like that, then you know what? You really ought to pick one up. Get it? Because it's the Otter? Okay, anyways, hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day and that you take full advantage of this information in your buying process. Have a good one, everybody. Bye now.